All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of the Truth About Your Health podcast, where we teach exhausted and burnt out adults the truth about their health so that they can get their health back quickly. And today it's like I'm a kid in the candy store because Siim is someone that I've been watching for a long time. I have both of his big books, and he's got more books to even speak of. If you haven't heard of him before, his name is Siim Land. He's the author and content creator, public speaker, entrepreneur, biohacker, and health performance coach. He's written several books, just like I told you, about longevity and optimization for your health, metabolic autophagy, stronger by stress, the immunity fix, the mineral fix. And he's also now written another book called the NADPH or Circadian NADPH plus activation system. So Siim, thank you so much for being here today. It's a real pleasure to have you here joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, so listen, I love your intro story in terms of your backgrounds in anthropology. And if I were to be completely honest with you, in my first year of university, I took anthropology as an elective because I didn't know what to take. And it was one of those times where it was an elective for me to show up to the actual class. And I didn't do very well because I wasn't focused at that time. But can you tell us how that anthropology was a springboard to becoming the credentials that we just talked about for writing books on longevity and health optimization? How did that happen?
Well, the reason I took or started studying anthropology was I was just very curious about human nature and human society, culture, and those kind of things, all those things. And I started, like the anthropology degree because of that felt like the right thing to satisfy my desire to learn about those things at that time. And during the anthropology studying, I started to think about, okay, well, like what do I want to do in the future actually? And that kind of, for some reason, I came to the conclusion that I would like to be like a writer, or like write books and or be an author. Whichever form it ends up taking, and it's just like the medium that I enjoyed. During the college years or university years, I did start to write my blog about biohacking and health. Initially, it was just very simple, just different kinds of nutrition strategies and training, and the kind of like very simple things, and just started to grow a little bit of audience from there, not like a significant amount, still very small. And then I did write a few books about a ketogenic diet, and started to sell that on Amazon. That kind of that was like my first source of income online, and made me realize, hey, I can do this like full time and do more like more in-depth research and more thorough books and those things. From that, I started to create YouTube videos as well, and that was most of my audience came from at that time. And YouTube grew quite well because I think I covered some topics that many people didn't talk about, like ketosis or cyclical ketosis and intermittent fasting, and mentioning things like autophagy, and actually explaining what it is and how it works, and refuting some myths about it. And I think that it kind of helped to springboard my audience because of covering this novel topic that many people didn't know about, especially the details about it. And that kind of made my initial my brand or my audience was associated a lot with this intermittent fasting and autophagy, which I think still most of it is what I'm most known for, the Metabolic Autophagy book. And regardless, that was what I started to talk about. But over the course of time, I implemented more topics, just general health and saunas and exercise, and more into actually longevity stuff as well by now, and wrote several books on different topics, like Stronger by Stress, which was the book about hormesis and stress adaptation. And then I also started to co-author many books with Dr. James DiNicolantonio, The Immunity Fix, which talks about the immune system, the mineral fix about minerals. The latest one was a win, which talks about actually athletic performance and exercise. And the next one that we're working on right now is the obesity fix. So it's going to talk about like weight loss and weight management.
Yeah, no, it's an awesome breakdown of where you got to today. I could see how anthropology, just in terms of the study of cultures, and would naturally evolve as you continue to open up the next door and go through that, and then listen to what your audience is what resonates with them, and then continue to refine and get into where you got to. So thanks for sharing that. Just an obvious spectator question though, Siim, how do you remain so productive? Because it is amazing to see how, I mean, these books are thick, and and just to mention, you have all these things on the go. I guess those are your biohacks, but specifically in terms of just sitting down and crushing it and getting content out, what would you say, what's the secret to the success on that?
I think it's a lot of having very good systems and routines and habits that put it into autopilot almost, or making it very effortless. So I have like a system for writing, and I have a system for making videos and social media posts and whatnot. So I just stick to that routine. And I do think that a lot of it is just a lot of like being productive deliberately, of wanting to do those things and doing them, and not like wasting time or something like that. Of course, there are days where I don't follow the systems, and but those are like the exceptions, because most of the time I do enjoy it so much that I want to do it. Like, I'm so excited to write the next book that I write it every day, and doing it quite many hours. So it's just being very passionate about what you do and excited about what you do, that the work doesn't feel like work, and it's very like enjoyable. It's very very useful to also have that work that you do a part of your like life, or kind of meshed with your life in some way. Obviously I think it's very very good quote unquote job to take care of your health and learn about nutrition and exercise and those things. So I'm kind of happy that I've managed to create this lifestyle for myself that prioritizes my own health, and being able to also share that information with others that I've learned.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons that it's so resonating for me, is the integrity that's there when you practice what you preach. And it definitely is something that I can sense that obviously you're passionate about, and it's not work to you. I guess the biggest success comes with that focus. Just like if you had a magnifying glass, I know when I was a kid, I used to like to shine it and then make a piece of paper go on fire because it's so concentrated. I think the real lesson is in how you organize and the systems you've come up with to be able to consistently churn out content. Just as a feedback for me, my biggest concern is when I start to do that, I get so overwhelmed that I wish I have so many things I want to put in there. And for you, it's the same thing, I'm sure, but you churn it out anyways, and then say, oh, I'll write whatever I want to write in the next book that I can include on that. So kudos to you. I'm still in like the 7 books that are in my head that I feel I have to put in one book. But so let's kind of shift over into longevity and circadian rhythm. So as far as my demographic, or the people that would listen to this, identify themselves as having an adrenal fatigue problem. And I tell them, listen, it goes more than adrenal fatigue. The adrenals don't actually fatigue per se. 90% of the challenges occur outside of the adrenal system and all the feedback loops and communications. But besides that, I don't even feel HPA axis is a good term either, dysfunction, because it's just so much more involved than that. But the whole point is, we do understand, and most practitioners, whether they're allopathic or traditional or alternative, understand that there's a dineural pattern, or there's a circadian rhythm with cortisol, and it rises in the morning and then falls at night. But maybe you could start to explain how much more circadian rhythm is beyond just HPA axis, and why it matters so much.
Yeah, well, I think circadian rhythms are just the overarching rhythms of your body that govern everything inside that happening on a daily basis. There's also, like, ultradian rhythms that are longer than 24-hour cycle, but the main, like, what happens on a constant basis all the time is the circadian rhythm 24-hour cycle. And yeah, I mean, they govern, like you mentioned, the nervous system and the HPA axis function, but also things like just digestion, insulin sensitivity, energy production, exercise performance, your body temperature, blood pressure, and many of the longevity pathways are also linked to the circadian rhythm. And yeah, I personally think that, the circadian rhythms are one of the most underlooked and underappreciated aspects of longevity and anti-aging, which we can probably talk about a bit more in detail. But yeah, essentially, disruptions in those rhythms will cause, or like the reason why these disruptions are harmful is because they're going to put like more additional stress on the body, and inflammation rises. You have less insulin sensitivity, and things start to like go wrong. And one of the example of that would be shift work, which the World Health Organization does categorize as a carcinogen. So just being mismatched with the circadian rhythms causes disease, and being aligned with the natural circadian rhythm, which humans are, like diurnal creatures that were awake during daytime and asleep at night, that is where your body, is synchronized and aligned with how it's supposed to work. It receives the signals from the light environment, and that light will tell the body, okay, you need to produce these hormones, and you need to, govern these other processes so that you could stay healthy. It's like just the kind of the rhythms themselves are like signals or processes coming from the signals that you receive, like different signals, like the light or food or exercise. They will just tell the body, okay, this is what you need to do, and this is what the human body is like evolutionarily adapted to do as well. And if you're not aligned with them, then it's gonna cause some sort of a disease eventually.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that it really echoes how important that stress and just our day-to-day exposure and our communication with the earth has to do with adrenals and HPA axis and cellular function as a whole. And I know you've interviewed David St. Clair, and he talks about how aging is really a breakdown of communication. And I believe that the frequencies and the signals that are happening on a level that we don't realize to finally tune and synchronize our body. And it's really amazing. You're right. It's underappreciated. And the great thing about it is it's free. You don't have to patent it. I tell my clients, if you just go camping and not glamping, you don't bring your cell phone, you just go camping, do that for a week. And that's probably one of the best things you could do for your body to get it reacclimated to the earth. As far as where does NAD plus comes in? And you said we can get into a little bit of the aging. And so maybe tell our listeners what is NAD plus and what does it have to do with circadian rhythm and aging?
Yeah, well, NAD plus translates into nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, and it's this enzyme inside the body that is also involved with everything you do. It's like a currency that is being used to produce energy, regulate the immune system, and DNA repair. The circadian rhythms are using that, like muscle function, insulin sensitivity again are using that. And it's like ATP almost. You need like NAD to shuffle around electrons and things like that. And in relation to aging, there is a drop of NAD that occurs with aging. Like you lose almost or like over 50% of your NAD you lose after the age of 40 generally. And low levels of NAD are associated with all the hallmarks of aging, like cellular senescence, loss of proteostasis or autophagy, and dysregulated nutrient sensing and genomic instability and DNA damage and telomere shortening, they're all caused by low levels of NAD. And there aren't like, a lot of studies where they use NAD to, like, extend lifespan compared to some other molecules and compounds. But it is still, let's say, crucial for maintaining good health span, which relates to just, being functional and being functionally fit for as long as possible. And when it comes to the, obviously there's many ways to boost NAD levels, like exercise and intermittent fasting, calorie restriction. Those are like natural ways to do it. But one key part of doing that as well is like the circadian rhythm alignment, because there are like a lot of these NAD boosting supplements that you can take, like NMN and nicotinamide riboside. But the problem with only taking like this supplement is that unless your body's natural NAD factory or mechanism production line isn't working properly, then you're going to just take the supplement. You may get like a short-term boost in it, but your body's going to excrete the rest, and it's not going to start making it itself. It's not like you're not really making the body produce NAD itself if you're taking a supplement. Whereas if you have essentially the production working well, then you can also just help to recycle the NAD all the time. So you can get NAD from food, supplements, or having the NAD salvage pathway or the recycling of NAD working very well. And not exactly sure the percentage or the amount, but they do approximate that the vast majority of the NAD that you produce daily comes from the recycling and resalvage. So yeah, maybe like up to 90% of it, that's what I've heard, that 90% of the NAD you have every day is recycled on a daily basis, and only like 10% will come from the precursors from food or the supplements. So yeah, you need to have the recycling pathway working properly to have high levels of NAD. And the way you recycle the NAD, there is this one key enzyme inside the salvage pathway where you produce NAD, and NAMPT is what it's called. And this NAMPT enzyme is circadian rhythm dependent. So it's dependent upon a SIRT1, which is this circadian clock gene protein. And yeah, basically what it means that the circadian signaling is what will tell the body that it needs to turn on the salvage pathway. And I would suggest that, the most of the NAD gets recycled when you're sleeping, because that's what the body tends to do, to kind of clamp all these repair and rejuvenation processes into the night, together with like melatonin and other hormones. And during the daytime, it's just signals the body that kind of installs this information in there of being aligned with the circadian rhythms, and then enabling the body to also produce melatonin at night that would govern all these repair. But yeah, I think I'll stop here for a moment. So main idea is that the circadian rhythms will basically enable the recycling of NAD and keep NAD levels higher.
Yeah, no, it's a great answer, and I want to kind of link that to some of the analogies you use in terms of the recycling and the assembly line, and what I'll add to that is the widget, which would be the end product, but also how fast that assembly line is moving. So when I talk to our clients, I always do that analogy of supply and demand. Just think of it as you have more demand than you do supply. Or I use another analogy in terms of you have too many on-roads to your highway and not enough off-ramps to your highway. And when there's too much traffic on there, you're going to deplete your NAD, and you need to make sure you open up your off-ramp so that you can take the cars off the highway. So a lot of different analogies. But what increases the speed of that assembly line or the on-ramp to that highway is environmental stressors that I don't think we ever really planned for, in terms of EMFs, pesticides, sprays, growth hormones in our foods, plastics in the environment, enriched iron in our foods, fortification of B vitamins in our foods. I mean, the list goes on. And actually, it's just a good segue. There was a guy that I talked to that invented the first ever NAD plus testing at the last A4M meeting. And I asked him, I said, well, how is that going to be a good predictor of the amount of cars or how fast that assembly line is running if it's constant and it's always there? So I guess the question would be to you, Siim, do you see utility in being able to test NAD plus or NAD plus to NADH ratios if it's going to have high value, or you think it's just a snapshot in time that's not really predictive of future and past, I guess, quality of your demand and supply in your body? What's your feedback on that?
Yeah, I have had like some similar experiences that it's very, very like sensitive to a lot of factors. Like most of what is going to reduce your energy levels are going to be like inflammation and oxidative stress and EMF or whatever, this food, sleep deprivation, whatever raises like inflammation and causes DNA damage. That's mostly going to burn through the NAD as well. And I do think that the results could like change very rapidly. So for example, I did like the test, maybe like, yeah, like I did a test, my levels were high, and I did a test maybe, and at that time I was like, you know, very optimally functioning, and I did the test again maybe like a few months later, but this time I wasn't like, you know, very optimized, or I was like a bit underslept and those kind of things, exercising a lot and those, so my results were actually a bit lower because of that. And I do think that it's kind of, yeah, it can be like very sensitive to the changes in your like lifestyle and what you're doing on a daily basis. So I wouldn't say that it's something to like, you know, put a lot of long-term emphasis on it. Yeah, it's maybe like a snapshot in a particular moment to know like, okay, what my NAD levels is right now, but it's not going to tell you like anything about long-term health changes, so it's not going to be like a predictor of mortality. I wouldn't suggest. So more like the biomarkers themselves are more valuable and definitely cheaper and more easily accessible. So I'd much rather focus on them. The same with like the DNA methylation test that is used to assess like your biological age. It's also very sensitive and can change very rapidly. So it's, yeah, more like a snapshot. So I don't see like it does like have like a lot of, yeah, like long-term value. It can be like, again, used in the short term to know what your health status in a particular moment, but not very practical in the over the long term.
Yeah, I agree. I'm glad that you echoed that, because I do feel that there's a lot of other great surrogate markers for assessing metabolic syndrome, and which was interesting, you know, in your latest Circadian NAD plus activation system book. I mean, it's amazing how much references you have. Like, there's no BSing. It's all validated through substantial referenced material. One of the interesting things that I just wrote down quickly was you quoted a study that said in between 1988 to 2012, there was 34% of the population that had metabolic syndrome. But in the United States now, 88% of the people have metabolic syndrome. And I think that there's really great biomarkers like triglycerides over HDL, fasting insulin, AST, ALT, other really great markers that you can get every day that doctors aren't looking at from the broad ranges. But let me ask you just your opinion on that. Between 1988 and 2012, 34%. And I know it's not the same cohorts that we're testing or maybe the same people, but now 88%. What do you think's even if it were apples to apples, what do you think's been responsible for that huge dramatic increase in how many people are sick metabolically these days?
Well, maybe it's something to do with like a generational shift or something like that. The older generation who was kind of healthy has died, and now there's like the quote unquote like a new, I don't know, like Gen or millennials, or I don't know exactly how do they call these different generations, but yeah, like maybe this older generation who was, you know, back from the old day where they ate whole foods and exercised a little bit, or, you know, they spent like time basically like the pre-internet generation and pre this TV generation, those have all died, and that's like just increased the mean or the average rate of this metabolic syndrome in the population, because everyone after that was kind of more the TV generation, TV dinner generation, and that kind of thing. So just I think maybe like that would be like a sudden increase in that. But obviously just the more wide accessibility of the junk food in the environment, I think that's just the biggest cause of all these diseases. Not even like the lack of exercise, but I think the biggest one is just the food, the sheer excess of calories everywhere and in every food, and kind of the ease of access as well, like just the vending machines, Uber Eats, all the Starbucks coffee everywhere. So yeah, just people consume too many calories all the time everywhere.
Yeah, it's a good anthropological answer for sure. I love it. I'm older than you, and we didn't have cell phones, and we were just starting to get Atari and a television, but Amazon Prime delivered in 24 hours, and just the 5G, let alone if there's 6G, pesticides and sprays, it's just created an avalanche of huge challenges. So I like your answer, but I also feel that environmentally, I mean, I think in Estonia, you have more regulations about what you can put in foods and how you can spray the crops. And it always comes down to the almighty dollar, unfortunately. And I think we're seeing huge shifts in health as a result of that. But back to what we want to talk about, you did mention in terms of the NAD plus that what I do again with gene interpretations is now looking at sirtuins. And sirtuins can basically tell the body, hey, the assembly line's working really, really fast. There's a lot of inflammation, a lot of environmental triggers, all the TV dinner generation, not as much exercise, not as much communication with the earth, too much foods, overconsumption of processed foods. And then they say NAD plus in de novo factories start making more NAD plus. Tell us how we can do things naturally, because that's what you really talk about between resetting the circadian rhythm and everything else in between. What can we do naturally, Siim, to really get those factories working at full throttle?
Yeah, well, you mentioned all these bad stressors, EMF and food and pesticides and those things. Yeah, things that cause the inflammation and oxidative stress and DNA damage, those generally will deplete NAD, and because NAD is being used to kind of treat that situation, whereas all these different kinds of positive stressors, hormetic stressors as they're called, exercise, intermittent fasting, calorie restriction, sauna, cold, sunlight exposure to a certain extent, and there's different food molecules, xenohormetic food molecules, resveratrol, fisetin, apigenin, like polyphenols, coffee, green tea, those also help with the recycling and the salvage pathway. So they do it by turning on the fuel sensor called AMPK, which is like a energetic stressor, or detects energetic stress in response to like usually physiological stressors, and that in turn also helps to turn on the NAMPT enzyme to recycle the NAD levels. So yeah, all healthy lifestyle habits, exercise, I think, is kind of the most underrated way of, as well, not we said the circadian rhythm is the most underrated, but exercise is like the most powerful like anti-aging activity and longevity thing. It's more powerful than any drug or any supplement that currently we have, and it definitely has like a huge impact on NAD levels as well. They see that older people who exercise, they have much higher levels of NAMPT in their muscles as well, and even they may even have more of the NAMPT levels than let's say younger adults who don't exercise. So yeah, just exercising itself is going to be one of the biggest way to let's say put the factory into overdrive, or to start producing a lot more NAD. Both like resistance training and cardio would do it, but I would suspect that cardio and this kind of zone 2 cardio, as it's called, this very semi-low intensity long cardio, that I think is going to be the best way to kind of produce more mitochondria for mitochondrial biogenesis, but as well like help to boost NAD levels. Then from the food side, then the food is also like a cue for the circadian rhythms, and you don't want to like, you know, be eating at like odd hours or eating in the middle of the night, those kind of things, that those will also offset the circadian rhythm or disrupt it. So humans are kind of supposed to eat when it's daytime, and studies about time restricted eating do show that confining your eating window in a smaller time frame has some like health benefits. It's not like superior to calorie restriction in terms of weight loss, but it can improve things like insulin sensitivity and upregulate different these longevity markers like sirtuins and autophagy more than just regularly eating over the course of 12 hours, for example, like many people do. The average American, you know, eats over the course of 15 or 16 hours. So that's like not what I would recommend. I do think that it's better to like, you know, wait a few hours after waking up and definitely not eat immediately before bed. So have like a, you know, few hours from the bedtime as well to finish your last meal, and then eat maybe like, you know, definitely like not more than like 3 meals isn't necessary. So 2 to 3 meals within like a more like a smaller time frame. And the circadian rhythm side, just that for that you just need to kind of establish like a consistent bed and awake time. So you go to bed and wake up around the same time. You do want to get exposed to like natural sunlight, most importantly like in the morning after waking up, to start the circadian clocks. So just this UV light from the sun, that will be it's going to be much more powerful in terms of the brightness and intensity, even if it's cloudy, than being indoors. So being indoors doesn't really, you know, enable you to start the circadian rhythm, or that doesn't do it at least the healthy way. Whereas if you go outside after waking up a little bit, maybe 5 or 10 minutes, that will already tell the brain that it's, you know, daytime. And it's also actually just basically like, you know, it's like a domino stone. It's the first domino stone, the most important one, that will just, you know, push the circadian clock working in the right direction. And in the evening, you want to avoid these like bright lights, blue light, green light, because they're going to suppress melatonin and disrupt your sleep quality a little bit, and kind of disrupt the clocks as well. So bright light, movement, hydration in the morning. In the evening, just, you know, avoid snacking, avoid large meals, and block the blue light as well. I think that's kind of one of the main messages of the circadian NAD activation system as well, and the main like practical applications of that.
Yeah, I know, absolutely. It's amazing. It's that this dichotomy seem of how complex it could be, but at the same time, how simple it could be, right? I mean, this isn't rocket science to tell someone, hey, you need to go to sleep properly, and you don't need to be eating at 24 hours a day, and you need to get outside and be part of the earth. I mean, those are common sense stuff. But then when you start talking about FOXOs and sirtuins and NAD plus, sometimes you could lose someone if they're not into that science. But for the listener, I mean, Stronger by Stress, Metabolic Autophagy, we'll have links for that, as well as their circadian NAD plus activation. I know you give a lot of things for free, intermittent fasting guide. I guess the autophagy activation cheat sheet, sleeping better, a free guide. So I'll have links for those, because I think the other thing that I have to commend you on is not just how productive and how amazing your information is and how prolific you are, but how you give a lot of it away for free so that people can learn this information. So thank you for doing that. As far as autophagy goes, and you talked about intermittent fasting, and we have time restricted eating windows, or we have different strategies like 5 and 2, and then of course full fast and autophagy. Can you speak a little bit about that? Because one of the products that I'm developing, or names that I'm developing, is something called catabolic to anabolic. And the analogy I use is you can't drive with your foot on the gas and at the brake at the same time. and there's a fine line to that, meaning if you're not eating a lot, but then maybe you're getting a weight loss, you're lifting a lot of weights, or if you're doing a lot of mTOR stuff, but you're wishing to turn on autophagy. I mean, can you take us through maybe the different types of food restrictions and ultimately how to not drive with your foot on the gas and the brake at the same time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was kind of the main topic of the book Metabolic Autophagy. And there are, reasons to think that you shouldn't, like different like growth periods people can go through their life. As you're like a child or a baby, then you're growing a lot, like you're, in terms of the percentage, you grow like, very large, like you double your size in 1 year or something like that. So the ratios increase exponentially when you're young, and in your like after puberty it kind of starts to slow down a little bit. So you're actually aging the most or the fastest when you're like young, in terms of the changes you go through the fastest, and it kind of plateaus in your 20s and starts to slowly basically accelerate, or the process of aging slows down when you're in your 20s and 30s, and then you start to see more these visible and significant changes after it depends on when it happens. Like if you have good healthy lifestyle, then you can prolong it, but if you have like a bad lifestyle, then it's going to start to happen again in your 40s or 50s already, let's say, compared to 60s or 80s if you're healthy. Different growth periods. If you're young, you do want to grow, you want to build bone density and get a lot of nutrition and nutrients into your system so that you could grow and develop properly physical features and brain and those kind of things. If you're old, then you also like want to support the growth, not because you can grow, but for maintaining the things that you have. So if you're like, let's say 60 or 70, then what tends to happen is that your like muscle mass decreases because of many reasons. Some people say that it's you lose the sensitivity to stimulate protein synthesis, you just become sedentary, those kind of things. Whatever it is, like there is a significant trend in losing muscle mass if you get older, and you're not able to build it back up either that easily either, for different reasons. So in that scenario, you do want to support that growth as well by eating more protein and getting amino acids and those kind of things to maintain that. And likewise, when you're young, you want to do that as well to kind of grow and produce a lot of growth hormone and anabolic hormones to grow. It's like a bit controversial in terms of, do you want to do that all the time in your if you're in your 20s until 40s or 50s, do you want to do that all the time? There is like some animal studies, animal research that suggests that like being in this growth state all the time by being anabolic and turning on this pathway called mTOR and increasing IGF-1 levels and growth hormone, is that the most beneficial thing to do in your like middle years, or because there is like restricting protein, restricting the mTOR has been found to be beneficial for longevity in some sense, but like not all the time. Definitely you don't want to do that if you're like still growing, if you're like a teenager, and even like in your 20s maybe you don't want to do that significantly. You want to still be strong and build muscle as well in your younger years, because it's easier to do that. In your older years you may not want to do that, or this restrictive approach either, that much of restricting protein, because that would entail that you become more frail, and that can be harmful for sarcopenia and metabolic health in general. But I do personally think that there's some merit to going through these different cycles of growing, of being in a more anabolic state, and also going through stages of being more catabolic, because during that catabolic state you do see an increase in all these different longevity markers that we mentioned already, like FOXO proteins, sirtuins, and autophagy and NAD, and those very more associated with like increased lifespan and longevity. And the same applies to just calorie restriction. To restricting calories is one of the most known ways to extend lifespan in other species. Some people think that it's not the best thing for humans, which can be true because, you know, if you calorie restrict, then you also become more frail, or you increase the risk of nutrient deficiency. So you need to do it well, and you need to do it maybe like cyclically and not all the time. But fortunately, there are like some ways to mimic some of these effects that you see in calorie restriction. Like with intermittent fasting, we do see like almost like identical change in biomarkers as you would in calorie restriction, and the same applies to exercise. Like exercise mimics calorie restriction. So yeah, you can apply. You basically don't want to become overnourished. You don't want to become obese. You don't want to become overweight and develop metabolic syndrome. You don't want to be in this overnourished or overfed state, overabundant state all the time. You want to have like some periods of restriction, whether that takes the form of calorie restriction, restricting some sort of like the time window that you eat, maybe doing like a longer fast, whatever it is. But I think the reason why fasting can help with the longevity thing is that it kind of prevents you from getting obese or prevents you from getting overweight. And the same, but the way it works with calorie restriction as well. So just some people may prefer to do like a longer fast and not really restrict their calories at other times, whereas others prefer to do just a regular calorie restriction and then eating appropriately at maintenance or whatever. So yeah, I think that's the kind of main idea, to cycle through periods of growth and some sort of catabolism, but you definitely don't want to be this very low calorie state all the time. And when it comes to protein restriction, then yeah, I do think that, yeah, you maybe not eating a high protein diet all the time is the best idea. So you cycle that as well, but being on a chronically low protein diet can also be harmful because of, yeah, just increasing frailty risk and sarcopenia and not being able to build muscle. So yeah, protein can be very beneficial. Just you may not want to be eating like a super high protein diet all the time.
Yeah, it's a great answer. One of my mentors said everything we learned in life can be extrapolated from Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Not too much, not too little, but just right. And I think depending on where you are on your age and your life cycle, you're putting more emphasis on building. And then as we get older, you still want to maintain strength and mitogenesis, but you also want to make sure you're recycling and getting into autophagy. I do think, and you'll agree with me, seeing that the bodybuilders are the original OGs of biohacking, right? They understood this concept intuitively, even though they may not have known about the term autophagy or mTOR. I use the analogy almost like, think about a farmer's field, and they plant a lot of crops and the soil's very new and they're getting the most yield out of that soil in the early years, but at the end of the season, they got to go in there and churn the soil and recycle it so that they can repopulate the field again and rotate the crops and keep the minerals high. But as that field's been living for 80 and 90 years, their emphasis is more on recycling those soils and just getting good high quality nutrients, but maybe they're not looking to get the most amount of yield like they were 50 or 60 years ago, but they're still productive. I think that's a really good analogy in terms of what you just mentioned. And of course, modulating protein is a huge way to change that, especially you talk about, which is there's so many things I could ask you. I love how you get into methionine and glycine. I definitely would love to talk to you about that. But before I do, Siim, what are your biomarkers? I know you have the Oura Ring. As far as objective markers that you look at, or what's some ahas that you've had with your readiness or your sleep scores or your recovery, or objective markers that you look at, even though I still think subjective is most important. But what are some of these ahas that you've had, maybe that you could share with us, that you've seen in these objective markers, whether it's day-to-day testing or it's month-to-month testing with markers, but what are some of the things that you're seeing with your own body that gave you some ahas with?
Well, I think from my bio work or my blood work, generally I can see that when I'm doing like intermittent fasting and eating like, once or twice a day, then my biomarkers are generally very good. So I don't see like any of these negative side effects that people tend to talk about. Like I don't see loss in muscle. I don't see in low thyroid. I don't see high stress, high cortisol. I don't see high blood sugar or those kind of things. And funny enough, like even like, oh yes, like it is true that fasting lowers things like IGF-1, which can be good for some for anti-aging purposes, because it is associated with like cancer and aging, but in very high amounts. But like low levels of IGF-1 can also be bad because it like increases the risk of muscle loss and frailty, those things. So obviously I don't have any of those things, but my IGF-1 levels are still very low. And the reason why I think that it is low is because of the intermittent fasting. So because I still eat like a higher protein intake. So if I were to eat the same amount of protein across like three meals or 5 meals, then my IGF-1 levels will probably be higher. But because I'm eating in a smaller time frame, then it kind of compensates for that and keeps the IGF-1 level or the overall IGF-1 level low as a result of that. My sleep isn't suffering from the intermittent fasting either. It's good. I do sleep like a bit less than like an average person. Maybe I'm just kind of used to it, or but yeah, it's not like I don't sleep 8 or 9 hours. I usually sleep like 6 to 7 hours, something like that. And it hasn't had like any like negative effect on my biomarkers or my blood results. So those things are still good. Like I don't have a high blood sugar level even if I sleep less, which is usually what's going to happen with not sleeping enough. So I still get like adequate recovery. My deep sleep is great. My HRV is very good. Like it's actually super high. I think that reason why it's high is because of, again, like exercise, saunas maybe, but yeah, exercise and intermittent fasting I think is the biggest reasons that for my own HRV was high. Yeah.
No, I mean, I wouldn't expect it to be otherwise. I think that when you're dialed in as much as you are, and goes back to what we initially talked about, is like you don't have to force yourself to get up every day and dial into what you do because you love it. You're congruent with what you're teaching. You follow, you practice what you preach, and you're doing these. You mentioned as far as we're on not only on a dineural rhythm, but we're on a sort of a seasonal rhythm as well. And I think that's really important, where when we go into the summer months and there's more fruitful, we can do more calories, we can grow. But then when we get into sort of the fall and the winter, we're engineered to be more of a slower type of not as much calorie. Do you do stuff like that as well, Siim, in terms of the year and what time of the year we are, and sort of whether it's the foods that are available at that time versus eating foods that are imported and eating stuff that aren't? But are you aware of that as part of your biohacks and longevity strategies personally?
Well, I do think I do a little bit of it, just like intuitively, or just because like I have like things growing in my garden at that time. So at summer I would eat like more things coming from my garden, and at winter time I would still eat occasionally foods that aren't for that season. Like maybe like I would still eat some, like, I don't know, oranges or tomatoes in winter, but maybe like a little bit less probably. So yeah, I do in the summertime I tend to be more like fruits or a bit higher carb, and at the winter maybe like a lower carb, more a little bit. I just usually regulate that based on my activity levels, and if I'm more physically active then I'll eat more carbs, and if I'm less then I'll eat less carbs. So just maybe in the summertime I'm just generally more active a little bit.
Right. It's more of a natural, just what's available and intuitively how you've been. I mean, because you're so, I guess, dialed in with the resonance of communication of what's going on with the earth, which is great. I did mention to you before we started today that I wanted to do a genomic interpretation so that we can see what some of the challenges are, maybe from a genetically more susceptible, where would the weak links in the chain break if enough epigenetic triggers cause that to happen. I guess with David St. Clair, you mentioned about maybe 20% of our expression is genomic and 80% is epigenomic. How big are you or small are you into understanding some of the genomics, and if they're as important as you think they are, as people say they are, or just, I know with DNA methylation is a big indicator of aging as well, but as far as just how much credence do you put into that?
Well, yeah, for some things it can be, yeah, very important. Like MTHFR is going to be huge, and things like ApoE gene is going to be also very important. Whether you're a fast metabolizer of caffeine or slow, I think that's very important. So yeah, I do think there are a lot of very important things that you can learn from the genetics that can even be like life-changing. So some people are poor methylators, which can be fixed quite easily. So yeah.
Right. So, I mean, and again, I agree with you in terms of it. It's important to know from a pharmacokinetic or, as understanding how things metabolize or how they impact your body. And for me, it's not so much this gene does that and just gene does this. It's the whole nutritional, epigenomic, genetic susceptibility, the blueprint, the roadmap, the landmines, the GPS settings, to really know where you're going and what you need to do to change gears. So in respect for your time, Siim, one of the things that I ask as a parting question is, the name of the podcast is called The Truth About Your Health. So what truth about health do you know now that you didn't know when maybe you were just starting the anthropology and didn't know all the doors that you were going to go through, and talking about intermittent fasting and ketogenic diets and autophagy and mTOR? What do you wish you knew now that you didn't know then, or what truth is that revealed now that you may have thought was not, that was the opposite, or was told that it was true but it wasn't then? What would you think that would be for just on your life and what you've learned so far?
Mm-hmm. Well, I was already doing like intermittent fasting and keto and things like that when I started college, even before that. So I think like what has changed a little bit is that I think right now that like this carbohydrate intake and even like grains and those kind of things aren't as bad as people may think. I think they can still be part of they can still be a part of a very healthy lifestyle, and just people usually have like negative experiences with them because of, I don't know, past experiences, or someone told them that they're bad or something like that. From my own experience, I don't have any negative effects from that, and it comes down to like energy balance and like your biomarkers. If you're still very insulin sensitive and very metabolically healthy, then you should get away with carbohydrates and sugar in like normal quantities. Obviously not in like excess, but you don't basically have to think that any piece of bread or any piece of some sort of carbohydrate or sugar is going to kill you or is going to give you insulin resistance or diabetes.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the aha for me is that you've been dialed in your whole life pretty much. And I think that for the listener, I agree 100%. Like Michael Phelps, when he's exercising as much as he has, he needs to eat more calories to match that energy expenditure. However, I would just put the asterisk, all things being equal, I would agree with you. But given that we're in the US and there's still massive amounts of GMOs and sprays and so forth. It makes it really difficult for, unfortunately, the socioeconomic impact of things that get taxed or things that get supported, and how much more expensive it is for the average person to get stuff that aren't adulterated. But 100%, all things being equal, I agree 100%. Any other last comments or things that we didn't talk about that you want to mention? I mean, the listener, I'm sure, has already heard of you, but I will leave a bunch of free information for them to get access to what you publish and what you do. You did mention, I guess the last question would be, you did mention you have another book coming out. So what's new on the horizon for Siim? And maybe tell us about your organization, or what you're planning with your sustainable protein sources.
Yeah, well, the next book, The Obesity Fix, is gonna be maybe like in summer. We're gonna expect to release that. And it's gonna be just, you know, what is promoting the obesity the most, and what are the kind of most or what is the reason why people are eating so much, and where does that food and calories come from? How do you like help to mitigate that and reverse it, the obesity? And yeah, but also working on this like a hemp-based granule that has high protein and is basically like a plant-based protein source. That yeah, it's just like an alternative to things like Beyond Meat and these other burgers that tend to be actually very bad in terms of the ingredients and to your health. So I just want to create like a plant-based meat alternative that is actually good and has clean ingredients and doesn't have anything else artificial. Just, you know, it has only hemp flour and pea protein, so it's 100% like, you know, natural.
No, that's awesome. And I'm excited to see that when it comes out. But Siim, I want to thank you for your time. I will post the links to all the resources that we talked about. And I look forward to continuing follow you from the fly on the wall, so to speak, and seeing all the things that you're doing. And just want to thank you for giving me your time today and everything that you do. So thank you so much.
Yeah, it was my pleasure.